everybody, and welcome to Carnival Personnel Sideshow. I'm Jacques.
I'm Biff.
I wish. No, sadly, Biff is in a different time zone, and he can't be with us to record this sideshow all about retro video gaming with the proprietor of what's become one of my favorite new shops or favorite shops to go to, Replayed. And with that said, welcome to Bryan, the owner. Hey, Bryan.
Hey guys, how's it going?
So let's just jump right into it. Let's just get the elephant taken care of in the room right now. Bryan, what is the most iconic piece of video game music?
Probably just Super.
We lost Bryan.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, you cut out there.
Just as you went to answer the biggest question ever and cut out. So what do you think is the most iconic piece of music?
Like I was saying, I would say it's Super Mario Bros. Like theme song there. That's our hold music at the store. It's the easiest to recognize.
Is Pac-Man a close second, a distant second, or not even in the top 5 anymore?
It's pretty good. I don't know if that you would consider it music as much as sound effects, but yeah, it's there.
That's interesting. So Joe is a big, like I said, when we walked into your store, my 11-year-old just looked around. He hasn't been in a retro store, and he was like, "This looks like Joe's basement." So Joe, what are the burning questions you have to ask Bryan as far as retro gaming goes?
When are video game prices going to come down again? Because man, since the pandemic and since people got bored and since people got stimulus checks, everybody's selling everything. And now these jerks at Heritage Auctions who are bumping up,
don't get me
prices of, sealed Super Mario 64s. We went, there's a whole better podcast that discusses like the shady shenanigans of price fixing and about these auctions where you have investors who are trying to make something out of this hobby where it actually turns a profit. So now you see news reports of video games going for $1 million at auction, and now people are thinking, whoa, my shitty copy of Karnov for the NES should clearly give me, at least $10,000 at least. But even just the regular people that don't want to turn a profit or, try to resell their games, they're still willing to pay, a higher price for those cartridges now than they had in the past. And you thought that there would be like a bubble that had maybe would burst for the NES library, but it seems to be either plateauing or going up, especially for a lot of the more recognizable titles. So my question is that ever going to come down within our lifetime, meaning people who give a shit about the Nintendo or the NES and Super Nintendo? Or is it just going to be if you want to buy an original cartridge of, Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo, you're going to have to pay $100 or whatever it is?
Well, I mean, inflation aside, obviously that's, we're beyond that, but money's printing like crazy right now. So until the free money stops, and hopefully it has, but people really during the pandemic buying whatever they can, stuck at home. We sat on hundreds of copies of Wii Sports for Nintendo Wii, which also got out of hand, and there's just so many things, but right now in our market, we're kind of seeing a correction on most games across the board. Their prices are coming down. They're slowly starting to level back out. I don't know that they're ever going to go back down to pre-pandemic pricing. I can't foresee that happening. Too many people, have gotten interested in a hobby that didn't include hundreds of millions of people. So it's really, supply and demand, right? So there's a lot of people out there hoarding games right now because it's smart. So I don't know that you're ever going to see him. Yeah, and myself included. But it's. I don't think you have a choice. You have to hold on to him at this point. It's an actual investment now because, like you said before, people have gotten involved, and people that don't care about games have gotten involved. So there's real money to be made on the higher end of things. But, like you said, there's talks and discussions that it's really only 10 people that are doing this. But I don't know that we can control that.
It's funny because one of the fun aspects of the podcast we used to record it in Joe's basement pre-pandemic before we went to Zoom, is Joe has just walls of games. And one of the things is, we did a random video game review of the week where I would go over to one of his shelves, Bryan, and just take a game off the shelf. And Joe would have to kind of turn his back to not see, and just based on the space in the wall, have to guess what game I got and then review it. And part of the review was guessing the price. I would look it up on, a couple different places, and, one place, and a lot of his games were like, $3, and some of them were more. I'm guessing now, based on some of the games that we bought this weekend down at Retro World, I think I even spent $5 or $6 on a Atari 2600 game I know nothing about called Lost Luggage. and I'm hoping it's as awful as we think it's going to be. But even those games were like, there weren't a lot of deals to be had.
Yeah, I mean, we see that on our end too. We were there at Retro World, and we show up and we obviously bring some of the better games that we have. We don't tend to bring a lot of those cheaper games since we have a store and we have an outlet for that stuff. But that was pretty much the talk of the entire weekend, was just how expensive things are and how disappointed in certain vendors a lot of the customers were, and just how ridiculous the pricing was on everything. You're talking. I watched somebody buy a Sega Game Gear for $450, and it just blew my mind. Like, we would never charge that, but I mean, if somebody's willing to pay it, I guess, how do you decide what the value of it is? Well, so it was a problem. But some of those cheap games, like you said, there is no $3 games. We sell $3 games in our store, but they're not what they used to be. You're talking, even copies of Duck Hunt and Super Mario Bros are worth $6, $7, $8 now, and they're slowly going up. And it's, we've never seen this before in this industry.
It's speaking of your store for a second, how our paths crossed is you became the silver lining in a cloud, Bryan, because I won't say how it happened, but let's just say a PS4 system was unplugged unceremoniously from my house and effed up a HDMI port. So I brought it into you, and you fixed it. And while I was in there, honestly, I kind of don't want to say what I bought in case one of my kids accidentally listens to the podcast. Because of some of the stuff that you have priced in there, I was 50-50 on buying a product that my wife ended up coming back in later that day because you fixed it in a day. And she's like, oh, yeah, we have to get it if it's only this. And then I told Joe how much it was. And Joe's like, dude, that's an amazing price. And I even told him, it's like, yeah, there's a couple things that I saw there, like NES systems that I don't have a lot of games, but I got a hookup. I got a friend who has every game I can borrow. But yeah, I mean, your stuff, first of all, the customer service, the fact that I was able to bring it in and you fixed it, quick and did a great job and right away is why I circle back, and we'll talk about the event we have coming up together. But it's like, yeah, your pricing was well worth the hour drive that I made each way. And then when Joe and I got to Retro World, some of the same stuff that I saw in your store was 2 or 3 times more money. And I'm like, well, yeah, if they can get it, good for them. But it's like, yeah, there's, I almost wanted to like stop people from buying from vendors and saying, hey, why don't you go track down this guy first?
Yeah. We've been in business for 12 years. I know there's a lot of companies out there that have been around longer than us, but ever since the day I opened the store, it's just been a goal of mine to just always be fair. We're not trying to make as much money of these people, even though our overhead's a lot higher since we are in proper Boston. But it's always been a, duty of mine, I guess, to make sure that we don't go above and beyond pricing based on what you can get it elsewhere. We want to be the place that you can go in and what to expect. And it was honestly very disappointing seeing some of the other vendors who do have stores, and obviously I'm not here to name names, but their pricing being so outrageous, and it gets to a point to where it's you're not ripping somebody off, you're doing it because you can, and that doesn't mean you should, and that's where we're at right now. But we heard that all weekend, and even from us, we feel like we're fairly priced, but we had a lot of customers saying, I'll never pay that for the game, and it's outrageous that you're asking that much. And we would tell them, if you just go to eBay and you go to sold listings, or you use price charting, or whatever it is that you're using, we're pretty accurate with where the market stands. It doesn't mean we agree with it, but there's no reason we should be lower than it. If we lower it, somebody else is just going to buy it to resell it anyways.
So let's go back 12 years ago. Why did you decide to, hey, I'm going to jump into this? And did you have a significant other who said, oh, that's a great idea? Or did you have a significant other saying, what are you thinking?
Well, at the time, I'm originally from New Mexico. So I moved here in 2007. And I actually started to work for a company at the time called CEX, which a lot of people do know about. And Complete Entertainment Exchange. And I actually started as a manager there. And when I was let go, I decided that I wanted to be their competition, and that's how it started. But now they didn't deal in retro or anything like that. But I just decided to do what I wanted to do with the store, which was I've always been into electronics, and I know how to repair them, and that's what I went to school for. And then we got involved in video games, and we used to host tournaments and stuff like that. But at the time I was living with somebody who supported me, and I've always had a lot of support from the employees that I've hired here, and it's kind of turned into a family. And we like to keep it that way. And we're a successful business in Boston, so it feels good to be such, especially in the industry. It's really hard to be successful selling retro video games, which aren't necessarily the number one thing, especially at the time. Now it's all of a sudden it feels like right place, right time, but that's only because of the pandemic.
And what, you never forget your first love. You just don't. So what was your first video game system that you fell in love with?
Well, my first system was the NES, growing up, and it is still to this day is, my favorite system. I'm a big fan of Xbox because, during my teenage years and in my early 20s, I played a lot of Halo, but the NES always is my go-to, and there are plenty of games that I love playing, but I have my favorites. In my store, I have a Contra arcade machine because that's one of my favorite games of all time, and that's why you'll see half of the arcade machines that I have in the store. It's from that time period.
Joe, what is your favorite system? First, I forget. We did a show where I just went around the room, or Joe went around the room going system by system. How many working systems do you think you have in the basement, Joe?
I would say, I think a dozen, I guess. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
It's the NES.
It is the NES.
I'm an 80s kid, so that's, I think I had an Atari, like a used Atari, before I got my first Nintendo system back in the 80s. But yeah, the NES was just like, it was like a step into a larger world if you were playing video games, because it was just it's what I grew up with. And then I kind of skipped the PS2, Xbox, N64, well, GameCube generation, and then I didn't really get back into video games until actually the Wii generation, when I had kids young, so they were 6. Well, my oldest was like 6 when the Wii came out, so that kind of got me back into video games. And then now since then I find myself going back to the systems that I kind of missed out on, like the PS2 and the Xbox, and even the N64, the Nintendo 64. I would just find myself like discovering games that I hadn't played, when they were fresh, which is, great thanks to emulation. You can kind of, take advantage of that. And thanks to places like Replayed, where you can pick up like older systems and just say like, oh, wow, yeah, there's like this whole library of games that I didn't really pay attention to for some reason at the time. But now it's just like, yeah, I got money, and I got some downtime, and I want to see what this was all about. And, it's all good. But yeah, Nintendo Entertainment System is a number one rock and roll.
So Brian, is there a game, Brian, that you love that people are like, not a classic one that everybody knows, but is there a game that you're like, oh man, the whole world missed out on this, and this was really a great game that didn't get its due, or like, or a guilty pleasure game that you're
hidden
like
gem, if you will.
a hidden gem. Thank you.
Oh man, I don't know. It's a lot of times I don't know one off the top of my head particular. I guess I can mention one, but it is one of those weird ones. But there's a game for NES, Love Connection, where you're a little car.
Oh, City Connection.
City Connection. There you go. Yep.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorites. And I don't know why. I think it was the time we had Blockbuster when I was growing up. We didn't have a lot of money, so my parents would let me rent games, and it was probably a game that I think we ended up getting stuck with, or we picked up at a Goodwill or something. So I did play a lot of that, but being a video game store and an owner of a store, I get to see a lot of games come through, and it's always funny when some of these games come through that I'm in love with and not a lot of people hear about, but through conversation at the store, I get to tell people about them and convince people to play these mostly awful games, knowing that I loved them at a time for a different reason, but.
No, that, and like I said, I just a little over a week ago, via Joe, acquired a 2600 Vader model system that came with a few games, and my wife sent me down to Retro World with the explicit order: do not come home without Superman. And sadly, my quest was frivolous, but Joe is going to hook me up because he has this system. But it's one of those fun things. It's like we were looking for just any games, and there was a couple that it's like, oh man, this looks really bad, we got to get this and try it out. So I'm looking forward to playing some of those. But is there a point that you're like, okay, this system or this game is more hype than actually a good game? Or is there a game that people like just love that you're like, yeah, that's so overrated?
I don't know if I want to throw myself under the bus too much, but I would say the majority of games that I feel like a lot of people come into the store that they feel are, to them are iconic. I don't think I got to play a lot of those style of games growing up, and or maybe I just wasn't into them. I'm not sure, but there are games even like, don't get me wrong, I love Breath of the Wild, but I'm not a fan of the first couple of Zeldas. And
well, thanks for coming on the podcast. We was nice.
Again, throwing myself under the bus, but it's just, again, I didn't really get to play them. So they're not games that I've ever played, and I guess I don't enjoy that style of game from that time period. But going back and playing them now, it's tough. It's like going back to play like PlayStation 1 games. A lot of times you'll throw them in and it's like, oh, I don't know why I used to like this game. They're so hard to even look at sometimes, but it is, again, it's a lot of customers come in here and they have their but a lot of those really iconic games where they were hard back then, so I guess I didn't really get a chance, especially since we were renting games a lot. Couldn't beat it. It was really tough, man. So
yeah, games have, like, since the PlayStation era, have become longer and become more of a time sink, like especially with RPGs. I'm not a big RPG guy, though I do like Zelda, but Zelda's more of like an action RPG. But like, JRPG, like those Japanese RPGs like Dragon Quest and Dragon Quest, I think, is the only one I know. But like there's like isn't like Persona 5 like the Persona series like also like an RPG series? Yeah, so like I could never get into that. Like Final Fantasy stuff I could never get into. Even Final Fantasy 7, which is supposedly like the greatest RPG of all time. I can't go back and even get started on like even like a basic level, just because I don't know, I just don't want to involve that much time into a game. But what you were saying about like how going back to like PlayStation 1 games is hard because they just don't hold up. I think when Jacques was getting into Resident Evil games, like his jam was like Resident Evil what did you get started on?
5. I
RE5?
started at 5. Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't the most typical Resident Evil game, but it was a really good, it was a good game. But then you started getting into the series, and then you were like curious about going back to playing the original Resident Evil games that came out on the PlayStation. And I was like, well, here's what you have to know. There are these things called tank controls.
Oh,
and
awful. Awful.
You can't, it's not like a regular 3D game where you can just kind of move around freely. No, you have to turn your character to the position left and right, and then you have to push up to move forward. And but they've since remade the game, so now everybody can play those, iconic games with modern controls. But a lot of these games just don't hold up, but they do hold a special place in people's heart who grew up with those games, and they know the controls inside and out. So it's not like a terrible experience to go back to, because it's kind of like riding a bike for them. It's just like, I remember how to hold the controller. I'm used to using the Nintendo 64 controller, and and I can figure this out.
Bryan, when is there an official this is retro and this isn't retro? How long does a game or a system have to be up before it's retro? And like, when will the PS5 be retro?
It's kind of tough. I guess I base it on, the type of customers that are buying the games and really tell me that those games are from their childhood. I mean, that at this point, I'm only 35 years old, so it's pretty tough for me to decide what's retro and what's vintage. Into Commodore and all those eras, and obviously they're separate from the NES, and it's always been that way. But now the NES and the SNES are starting to become that generation. And now people are telling us, retro gaming is GameCube and N64. But even now the PS2 is somewhat retro. I know that they were creating games all the way up till 2015, but it's got to be retro at some point because of how long they were in circulation, right? The original Xbox, those consoles don't work anymore. I mean, there's fewer every single day. There are fewer and fewer PS2s and Xbox that are around because the system itself, the hardware itself, isn't holding up. Whether it's capacitors or people are just throwing them away because they don't think they're worth anything. So that's starting to become retro just based on how rare things are getting. But it is tough because we have people that are, I guess, in their early 20s now that still remember PS2 as their like first console. And like, it's really tough when you have somebody coming in and they tell you like that they played Pokemon Snap when they were like 5 years old. And I remember it being in Blockbuster stores. I actually had the Pokemon Snap machine in my store for the past 8 years or so. And it's just hard to tell. But the older you get, even at 35 years old, I have somebody coming in and they've never even heard of an original Xbox. They didn't even know it's a thing, and they're 10 years old now, and that to me is mind blowing. So it's kind of hard to decipher, especially when you see it on a daily basis, what's vintage and what's not. But you can tell, and where you stand when you talk to youth, and they tell you what's old and what's not.
Bryan, what's the oldest I guess chunk of games that you sell in your store right now?
I mean, I don't know if we have, they're all kind of same area, but we have, boxes and tubs full of, VIC-20 games and, Commodore 64 stuff. And we have a lot of like Apple software that's laying around and things like that. But popularity is probably going to be NES or, maybe Atari, but Atari's pretty tough because there's, it's mostly junk. So it kind of just sits there. But we do have a lot of that stuff, but it just doesn't move as fast because that generation was collecting as hard as the NES and SNES generation is collecting now. They were collecting that 10 years ago. So it's hard to find people that are new and getting into it, now at this age.
Yeah, right. But like most of those like ColecoVision games and the television games, they've all been like kind of grabbed by the collectors, from, like you said, like 10 years ago. So they're in people's homes now, and they're not getting like recirculated into the wild, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten them recently, but it's usually, unfortunately, in the nature of the business, it's usually when somebody passes away at this point. If we get a collection, a major collection, it's their family members don't know what to do with it. But we've noticed, a lot of people come in, and the Atari community or like the real vintage community tends to trade amongst themselves. And that seems to be the thing. They don't really come in. They know the games aren't worth much anyway. Somebody's going to sell me 150 Atari games, and I'm going to give them $15 because reality is most of them are worth 5 cents. It's not a lot to be made there, and there's only a handful of games that are even sought after. So we do end up a lot of that stuff, but like I said, the real starting point for like the entire collecting world is, as far as what we do, would definitely be NES.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to dive into next week. So the long story short is there's this great place called Mill Number 5 in Lowell that, have these great mom and pop stores. There's this, it's a new theater. Well, it's 10 years old, but it looks like it's from the 40s and it's great. And I've been dealing with the owner, Jim, for a while, talking about putting some events together. I am incredibly, I miss LA. I miss going to funky, weird, offbeat things. And so basically I said to him, it's like, I'll let me wrap my head around it. Let me put some events together that I would want to go to, and where I'm incredibly lazy. If this event was in Boston, I probably wouldn't go, and I'd say, oh, Joe, let me know how it is when you get there. But so one of the things that I thought would be fun is, they have a liquor license, and, people Joe's age, your age, Bryan, my kid's age, just coming in and playing old games. So this will be the first of what I hope becomes a monthly series. I've already talked, another aspect, another component of it is I want each event tied to either a fundraising thing that means something to me or to the people I'm involved with, or kind of like, a give back thing. Because, it's going to be a free thing. Just, hey, come on in and play these games. But, we're going to do, one event for my kid's school, for his band, one kid's in band and one kid's in drama. I talked to the guy who runs, it's called Afternoon of the Arts in Lowell, who has 400 kids in his, drama band thing, because not every school in the town of Lowell has the resources to have a band or drama. So they do a citywide thing, and there's 400 kids in that. But selfishly, I thought, hey man, wouldn't it be great to have a few beers, hang out with Joe and play Defender, and in a public space after, what are we talking? 20 months of not having these kind of things at this point, Joe. So that was, like I said, that was the whole genesis of it. And I was thinking
Genesis
about this.
Does what Nintendo don't. I just want to throw that in there.
Oh, that's awesome. But you said you've done things like this before, Bryan, where you've hosted like, game nights and different events. Am I just living in a pretend world, or are these things pretty fun?
I mean, they're definitely fun. Obviously, it's a different situation. We've only done a handful of events that, allow actual adults to come in and have beers, or, have a couple drinks or whatever that, entails. But they are fun. I think it takes a while to really get like the ball rolling, to get people to recognize that they're out there and to get the word out. But they're definitely fun, and it's always fun for a lot of people that don't really know that stores like us exist, because they wouldn't, at any given point in the day or their lives, they're not going to research to see if, hey, does somebody sell NES or Super Nintendo, or where can I pick up an Atari, or a lot of people don't really do that. But it's fun for them because they get to walk into a space and have these systems set up with maybe a couple iconic games that they can just jump into and play. And I think it always ends up being an event where you get to just talk to people and get the word out that this is a thing that people do, and collectors are out there and these stores are out there.
Mill Number 5, they've been around for a while. Like I said, they have a lot of fun different stores. There's a real record store in there. There's a mom and pop music shop. Coffee and Cotton is the room that they have this. They have a brand new gorgeous space upstairs, and Jim's like, hey, maybe we'll host it up there. And I'm like, okay, maybe the third one or the fourth one, but like you just said, I mean, I don't expect, I'm hoping that if, between like 25 and 40 people come in, between, my kids, their friends, my wife's friends, if I can get Joe to make the incredulous journey down Route 2 to 95 to come out to Lowell, that would be great. I'm hoping to create a scene. I'm hoping that it becomes a regular thing because, again, selfishly, it's like, I like to talk video games. It's one of the reasons Joe and I started the podcast. I like to play video games. And it's funny because, I think the older I get, I'm not the get off my lawn guy, but I'm less interested in playing the new latest greatest games. And I'm so stupid excited that Joe hooked me up with that Atari system, and when I get the gadgets that make it work on my HDMI 4K TV, because I don't know if you're finding this, Brian. I'm not finding a lot of Radio Shacks in my neighborhood anymore selling the connectors, but that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that this first thing, in a couple days on Wednesday, I first of all, I didn't even ask, how many and what systems you're bringing, and all that good stuff that you can let us know. But I'm hoping that enough people come over like the next couple ones that this grows to the point where once a month we can have a big thing in the bar upstairs, and there's a whole restaurant involved. But I wanted to selfishly be a fun hangout where people of our ilk get together and play Cubert together.
And how many? And Brian, just to follow up on that, what you're bringing, how many CRTs are you lugging up from Allston to
God.
Lowell?
I have no idea. I don't know if we even want to do that, but
I know, right?
We'll definitely bring the a couple small TVs and the connections.
The guy Jim has a bunch of HDMI compatible like monitors, like not so that, because basically it's almost like at Retro World there was just a line of smaller TVs that people could sit there and play the different games. So basically that, and of course I know what it means, Joe, but for some of the listeners who don't know what a CRT is, for the layman out there, why don't you tell the fine folks like John what a CRT is?
A CRT stands for cathode ray tube, and that's an old tube television, like the large, like 27 or 32 inch TVs you'd have in your living room in, say, the year 2001, that weigh 150 pounds. Those are those are what are needed to play a lot of these older retro systems properly, because of the, not only like the picture quality, but there's a thing called input lag, where HDMI TVs process the images at just like a fraction of a second later than a normal, like, older television would. So if you go to press the jump button on a Nintendo, like if you're playing Super Mario Brothers on an HDMI TV and you press the jump button, it might take Mario a half second to actually like react, or a quarter of a second to actually jump on the screen. Whereas on an older TV, it would be like an instant reaction. And that's just the way the technology was. So that's the benefit to having a CRT or an old tube TV with the older systems. And they have devices, like high-end devices, where you can hook older systems up to an HDMI TV where there's almost no lag, but it's kind of cost prohibitive and kind of nerdy and tweaky, and it's not really like available, or it's not out there for like the general public. So that's why like a lot of those like mini systems that Nintendo put out, like the NES Mini that like would play like 30 Nintendo games, hooks right up to your HDMI TV. That's more of a consumer friendly solution for giving just regular people a fix so that they can play these older games on modern TVs. So that's kind of the challenge with preserving these old systems and playing these old systems in a modern setting, is you kind of need these old TVs to make it really to replicate that experience that we had in the 80s and 90s.
So it's either like using an emulator to play the old games, or the real systems with the old TV. So now I have to start searching Craigslist, not just for hookers, but for old tube TVs.
Yeah, it would come in handy. But but speaking of emulators, Brian, what is your like stance on like flash carts for older systems? Like good, bad, kind of, par for the course, or what do you think?
guess it just depends on who's buying them and for what reason. You know, for the most part, it's hard for us because right now, you know, reproduction carts are obviously a nuisance to collectors, you know, across the world. But the you know, the ones that are like 101, you know, I have like a Neo Geo cart that has like 100 games on it, and it's cool because I can put it in my, you know, an AES system and play it that way, and it's great. But only because those games are, you know, sometimes thousands of dollars, and I'll never get a chance to play them. So if you're buying it because you're you know, you just want to play them, it's fine. It's the same thing as buying one of those NES classics. I mean, it's really, that's all you're doing, and at least you get like the feel of your own controller on your actual system. You know, it's also, it's a nuisance sometimes because a lot of those ROMs that are ripped to those cartridges are awful and they're not the real game, and you know, a lot of people don't really get the true experience. But you know, I tell people all the time, like, if they're gonna buy them, they need to know what to expect. They're gonna be playing, you know, Super Mario dudes. they're not,
Yeah.
they're not gonna be playing, you know, their Battle Frogs or whatever they're playing. But it works. It gets them into the, you know, a lot of times it introduces people to the hobby, and it makes them want to go out and buy the original copy and the original system with a tube TV and, you know, get the whole works. But you know, somebody that just wants to see what some of those games were like, and you buy one of these cartridges for, you know, $30 on eBay, it's not terrible. It's only my only issue comes with when people start reproducing boxes and cartridges and labels. That, you know, that becomes a real problem, and it kind of makes us, like, at this point we're up there with, you know, card graders and, you know, jewelry. We have to have some way of detecting what's real and what's not in it. I hate being the person that bears the bad news that you purchased a fake cart. That's that's the worst in the world.
Yeah, that's sort of what happened with GameStop last, or pre-pandemic, about like the year before the pandemic. I think 2019.
Yeah, who didn't predict that though?
Right. GameStop decided to get into dealing in retro games, and they just got in way over their heads. They were kind of like dipping their toe in it, but at the same time going whole hog on it, where it's just like, yeah, we'll take all of your retro games, you know, and we'll resell them, you know, and you know, that's our new market for us. You know, we're new games are more digital now and less, you know, physical. So let's see what this retro game market is like. And what they found themselves doing is you'd see like reports of people buying like fake cartridges, like fake, you know, Game Boy cartridges or Nintendo cartridges or reproduction cartridges that they are, you know, that are being sold as original cartridges. So like, it's like if you're buying a game that the original cartridge would cost $100 for, and you're getting some cheap knockoff, the people at GameStop were like, I don't know, they look the same, so we're selling them as, you know, it says Earthbound, which is like a $200 game or $300 game, and we're going to sell it at that. And it turns out, no, it's not really Earthbound. It's like a reproduction cartridge, like, you know, some, you know, overseas knockoff. And so yeah, you kind of have to become like a real expert, like a curator of these old cartridges, yeah, to really, you know, keep up the integrity. But and that's another thing that I kind of worried about, is that GameStop had the name, so they were appealing to the masses that were trying to just like offload their old, you know, Nintendo cartridges or Sega cartridges, and they would just, GameStop would be like the Hoover vacuum that would suck up all of these games and take them off the market. And then when their market goes belly up, where do those cartridges go? Like are they just like reselling them to resellers and at the, you know, at the lowest price, and now they're in like a handful of other resellers? Are they destroying those cartridges? Are they destroying the boxes? Like that kind of thing, you know, it kind of pissed me off when I was, you know, reading about it and seeing it.
Yeah, but, yeah, of course. I think that type of stuff is detrimental to us, like as a business. As soon as we found out that GameStop was going to be doing that, I think, you know, it's disappointing. Obviously, it's clearly a bad business decision for them because they have no idea what they're doing. But obviously, we would want them to make that bad business decision because we want to see them go, you know, belly up and whatever they're doing. But at the same time, like you said, we knew that they were going to be the ones taking all the product. Luckily for us, you know, not to throw anybody under the bus by name or location, most of the GameStop stores in the area during that time were still sending to, you know, turning away because they knew, customers are getting ripped off. They're selling things so unbelievably cheap that they don't know what they're doing. But at the same time, you know, they want them to be on display somewhere and not just shipped to some warehouse in Texas where who knows what happens with them. So it was a really bad situation, but it doesn't go just as far as, you know, vintage gaming. We're starting to see it now with DS cartridges, you know, left and right with and all these, you know, Pokemon games that we're having to really do our research, and we have to have pictures available and numbers available and things to just, you know, reference to. And you're right, we become like curators to a point to where you know, I have a handful of people that work for me that I consider experts, and we won't even let our an employee that hasn't worked for us for at least a year purchase those games on their own, because we have to have somebody that, you know, if they're advanced games, we're opening them, you know, or if they're DS games, we're comparing them to other pictures. And it really just takes a lot. And it's the whole thing's become so complicated that it's just a hard hobby to be a part of now at this point.
Yeah, it's a change. It's definitely a bigger hassle now than when you started 12 years ago. And so 12 years in, is going to replay still like the love of your life? Is it still a passion that you have? And what do you see like over the next few years over at Replay?
Well, I think I'm obviously I'm more passionate about it now than I was when I started, only because when I first started, I really just wanted to, you know, run a business and be successful and get my name out there. And there was such a different drive. But now that I am successful and I know what I'm doing, and it's a lot easier to enjoy it because I can take things a lot easier. And, you know, my staff they're all seasoned and they all know what they're doing, and I know how to train them correctly. And so it just becomes more enjoyable all the way around. But, you know, with that comes experience, and, you know, a lot of customers come in not knowing what to expect. Once they hear our employees talk, or they hear me talk to them about what's going on, you know, or the problems they're having with their devices, whether it be cell phones or video game consoles or just games in general, and they see the equipment that we have in the store, it becomes, you know, these people love coming to us and we love them being here. So it is really easy to be passionate about it now. It doesn't take as much work.
That's awesome. I'm going to let you jump in just a second, but the biggest question, I started with the music question. What do you think the greatest video game of all time is, and why is it Galaga?
I have no idea. That's so hard. I guess it's all personal, I guess, you know, but out there. And for me, I guess I end up referencing arcade machines more than anything. It's really, that's like you know, a side passion of mine is collecting arcade machines. So you can go back as far as like Tempest or something like that and say that those are some of the best games. But, you know, I'm definitely not going to say GoldenEye, because that's what everybody's favorite answer is lately, and that's a hard game to go back and play and see those graphics. But
I will say, I'm sorry, I was just going to say regarding GoldenEye, during the pandemic, I do have a copy of GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64, and I 100% of that goddamn game because I was on a mission. I was on a mission. I had a lot of free time, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to make this game my bitch. And I did. And I
take a skate around.
Right. No, I mean, it was just fun to actually, yeah, it is like those graphics are rough, but luckily I had the CRT, so it was a little bit more palatable. But one final question for me is, I guess, what systems do you see are selling the fastest nowadays?
Well, I mean, outside of, you know, your current gen, I guess, or, right, you know, second generation. If we're going back just like in retro, it's probably, you know, you're probably up there in like GameCube and N64. They kind of go hand in hand, and those are probably the ones we can't keep on the shelf the most. It's hard to sell somebody an NES system these days, only because of all the emulation out there, and those consoles, those games fly off the shelf, but the consoles, you know, they're a dime a dozen. But N64s and GameCubes we can't keep in stock, and they're also, you know, they're smaller libraries of games. So I think a lot of people find it really easy to start there as far as a collector goes.
Yeah, and Nintendo is just like, they've always been Nintendo. Like they just, the name alone is going to get an audience.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And the quality of games is just going to be higher from Nintendo than, you know, some other parties.
This was completely awesome. Joe, thank you for jumping on. Bryan, thank you so much for making time. And I'm really looking forward to hanging out on Wednesday at Mill Number 5 and playing your games.
Which Wednesday would that be? We want to let the viewers know. Let the
Wednesday,
listeners know.
Wednesday, November 17th, which is 2 days from now, because we're recording a week early, but this drops on Monday. So yeah, in 2 days from this recording dropping on Wednesday at Mill Number 5 in Lowell, our friend Bryan from Replayed will be showing up with some games, and I will be buying him some beers, and we will be playing together, Joe.
And that's I want to say that's Replayed in Allston, Mass. Anything else you want to plug, Bryan?
Your Twitter, your Facebook, all that good stuff.
No, yeah, we on Instagram you can find us at Replayed Allston, and on Facebook it's just Replayed. Our address is 252 Bryan Avenue here in Allston.
Say that again. Sorry, it was breaking up. I just want to make sure you get it clear on the address.
It's 252 Brighton Avenue in Allston, Massachusetts.
Excellent. And I've been to the store myself. It is just a wondrous establishment.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But yeah, and by the way, I don't have walls of game. I have a wall. I'm not a nerd.
You got I'll chastise you. I think you're playing the semantic game, but anyways, Bryan, this was great. I'm looking forward to hanging out Wednesday the 17th, and with that, I bid everybody adieu.
Thank you guys for having me on.